It is the most elusive treasure of them all, the cup of Christ, used at the Last Supper and imbued with miraculous powers.
It was really the answer to whatever it is you need, the ultimate balm, the ultimate healing thing, the solution to one's problems.
The Holy Grail has bewitched treasure hunters for over a millennium. And Heinrich Himmler, the head of the Nazi SS, would become obsessed with finding it.
Don't underestimate Heinrich Himmler. What he wants, he gets.
He scoured the world in his search and was said to have sent special forces on top-secret missions.
Who better to send on your Grail quest than Otto Skorzeny, the ultimate one-man Nazi fighting machine?
And he placed the resources of the SS in the hands of Germany's foremost Grail hunter.
Otto Rahn was really the real Indiana Jones,
who would eventually give his life in the ultimate Nazi treasure hunt. This is the story of Himmler's quest for the Holy Grail. Berlin, 1933. The Nazis are in full control of Germany. Otto Rahn, a young cash-strapped writer, is heading to a meeting. He is answering a mysterious telegram. An anonymous benefactor has offered Rahn 1,000 Reichmarks a month, a very impressive wage, to write a book. The meeting is at 7 Prince Albertstrasse. Rahn has no idea who will be waiting for him.
He goes there, and who should he see but Heinrich Himmler himself.
Reichsfuhrer Heinrich Himmler was the second most powerful man in Nazi Germany, second only to Adolf Hitler. Himmler was the head of the SS, a fearsome paramilitary organization which controlled much of the Nazi state. He charged Rahn with a remarkable, almost unbelievable mission: to find the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail is the most sought-after treasure in history.
The Holy Grail is the cup of the Last Supper, the cup of Christ, that is meant to have been used to celebrate the First Communion.
It is commonly believed that the same cup was used by the disciple, Joseph of Arimathea, to catch the blood of Christ whilst he was nailed to the cross. But other legends say it is even older than that the Grail was used by Abraham, the founding patriarch of the Jewish people.
There are other people, of course, who think that it's the cup of Abraham. And this cup apparently became part of the sacred treasure of the Jews and was carried around with the Ark of the Covenant.
Over the years, the legend of the Grail has grown and been embellished. Sometimes it is said to be a stone or a plate, but most commonly, it is a chalice. Whatever it is, all the legends agree that the Grail possesses miraculous powers. For the Grail is supposed to provide its holder with eternal life.
Grail is really the answer to whatever it is you need, the thing that will fill you up when you're empty, that will heal you when you're wounded. It's kind of the ultimate balm, the ultimate healing thing, the solution to one's problems.
Such is its mystique. The Grail has obsessed treasure hunters for centuries. Tales abound of crusader knights searching for it, whilst they laid waste lands in the Middle East. And in legend, many of the stories of the mythical King Arthur and his knights concern their quest for the Grail. But despite thousands of years of searching, no one has ever found it. But why would Himmler want such an item? Not only was he a fanatical Nazi, it seems he held some other very unusual beliefs. He was obsessed with mystery, legend, astrology, the occult, and Germany's pagan past.
Himmler fundamentally was, today we would call him a geek. He was the type of guy who was massively into Tolkien. He'd be playing Warhammer every day. He was just a nerd, if you like. I mean, there's no other word to describe him.
Well, Heinrich Himmler was obviously an extremely strange man, but he was in a position of extraordinary power.
Don't underestimate Heinrich Himmler. What he wants, he gets.
Himmler shaped his SS on the traditions of Germany's pre-Christian tribes. He promoted a cult of ancestor worship, and within the SS, Christian festivals would be replaced with pagan holidays. Instead of Christmas and Easter, Himmler had his SS celebrate the winter and spring solstices. Officers were married in SS rituals called Ehrweihe. SS naming ceremonies replaced christenings. It was as if he were attempting to create a new Nazi religion.
By reawakening the old gods and the ancient traditions of their Germanic ancestors, they hoped to create a new order that would dominate Europe for the next 1,000 years.
Even the design of the SS insignia reflected Himmler's obsession with Germany's pagan past. It was two Sieg runes, occult symbols of a long-dead Germanic people.
You've got this creation of a kind of whole mythology which starts to become a real, quote-unquote, religion. You've got all these sort of elements that the Nazis want to include, and if you're trying to create a religion, if you want to look how to do it, well, you should just study Himmler and what he got up to, because in many ways, he was the perfect kind of cult leader. And that's what Nazism became, and that's what the religion behind Nazism became. It was basically a cult.
Himmler's obsession with mysticism led him to focus on one of the greatest legends of all: the legend of the Holy Grail. He selected for his headquarters Wewelsburg Castle in northeast Germany. He installed a round table and a ritual chamber in the basement of the north-facing tower. He named rooms after King Arthur and the Holy Grail. This was to be Himmler's Camelot, a castle for his new knightly order.
He wanted the SS to be a kind of breed of Teutonic knights, and he wanted to blend Arthurian myth with actual present-day, real, mechanized military machine. He wanted to have those same sort of knightly virtues that you read about in Grail legends.
Now he had his castle and his knights. There was one last thing he needed.
Now, what better to have in your knightly Arthurian-style castle than the Grail itself?
And that was why Rahn had been summoned to meet Himmler. Because Rahn was Germany's leading expert on the Holy Grail. Otto Rahn was born in 1904. He grew up during the horrors of the First World War. As an escape, he immersed himself in legends and mythology.
He was enamored by all the myths and legends of the old days, because the present was not so nice. So that he fled back in books and stories, and the stories of Wodan and Donor and all the Nordic stories.
His favorite myth, very popular in Germany, was about one of King Arthur's knights of the Round Table, Percival, known in Germany as Parsifal. The best-known version of the story was written by Wolfgang von Eschenbach in the 13th century. In the tale, a young Parsifal searches for the elusive Grail. In Eschenbach's version, the Grail is not a cup, but a rock.
The Grail is described as a hard, dark stone, which is contained in a reliquary. And Eschenbach says whoever has this stone or is near to it will have eternal life and will be healed.
According to the legend, Parsifal eventually finds the Grail in a mythical castle which Eschenbach calls Münzalbesch. Rahn became captivated with the tale, believing that Münzalbesch was a real place and that the Parsifal story was actually true. He was convinced that by studying it, he could find the castle. And if he could find Münzalbesch, then he would find the Grail. The young Rahn threw himself into researching these myths.
I think Otto became enthused with the idea of actually finding the truth behind these legends. Also, he had a very methodical German mind. He was trying to really back-engineer the myth by finding the historical personages that became the figures in mythology. We can see in his work that there's maps and genealogies.
After years of researching, Rahn eventually discovered a clue. He found it in the songs of the troubadours, the traveling poets of the medieval courts of France.
Otto Rahn rightly decided that the troubadour songs were really the only authentic record of what had happened. That a lot of the written records had been destroyed, but through oral tradition, through the songs and through the legends, echoes of what had really come down still survived into the present day.
In some of these songs, the troubadours sang of a medieval religious sect called the Cathars. The Cathars were said to have owned great treasures, including a sacred relic, a rock that had fallen from heaven. Rahn was sure that this relic must be the Holy Grail, as described by Eschenbach. The Cathars certainly were real. They were a 12th century religious sect, predominantly from the Languedoc region of southwest France.
What we call Catharism is really a variant of Christianity which believed that you needed no intermediaries between man and God, that any individual could have direct commune with the divine, which meant that the entire hierarchy of priests, prelates, cardinals, the entire church was kind of irrelevant, which also bugged Catholicism no end.
The Pope branded the Cathars heretics, and a vicious crusade was launched against them.
And this religious group of people were hunted down by the Roman Catholic Church because they opposed the Roman Catholic Church.
Across southern France, the Cathars were slaughtered in their thousands by the forces of the Pope. The last remaining Cathars were besieged in a mountain fortress called Montségur.
Montségur was the place where the Cathars held their last stand in 1244. This is when the armies surrounded the castle for 10 months.
Eventually, the odds were just too much for them, 10,000 against approximately 300 fighting men. After a 16-day truce, the surviving Cathars under their last priest, Bertrand Marty, were chained by the hands and the neck and dragged down the mountain at dawn, hanging them, cutting their throats as a way of destroying the faith once and for all.
And finally, after they surrendered, 200 Cathars were burned at the stake. So it is gone into history as the last stand of the Cathars.
All of this was verifiable fact. But if, as Rahn believed, the stories of the troubadours were also true, what had happened to the Cathar treasure and the Holy Grail?
When the Crusaders entered the castle, there was no trace of the mythical treasure, the infinite amounts of money they had expected. And over the years, various legends and rumors have accrued around what actually happened to the treasure of the Cathars, the treasures of the faith.
Rahn uncovered local stories which said that the Cathars had managed to smuggle their treasure out of the castle before it fell.
There was a very enduring story, a myth perhaps, that there were 4 of the Cathars who were hidden in the castle against the terms of the ceasefire, who apparently escaped the night before the burning, carrying with them the legendary Holy Grail. People started to believe that it had been smuggled out.
The escaping Cathars, according to this legend, then hid the Grail somewhere in the network of caves and caverns which run for miles throughout the mountains. Rahn became convinced that the legend was true and that the Grail had to be hidden at Montségur.
I can see Rahn's thinking in that he thought that these really were the places described in the original myth. And he was certainly very, very enthused and excited by what he had found.
Otto was quite sure that he had to find the Grail here, that this must have been the place where they hid it.
Even before being summoned by Himmler, Rahn had traveled to Montségur, a beautiful, remote area of the French Pyrenees. He was sure that the Grail could be found in the uncharted mountains of this region. He spent years exploring the area.
All these places were completely off the map at that point. No one knew about this history or about the existence of the caves or the castles.
The work was difficult and treacherous, but undeterred, Rahn sunk more and more of his money into the quest.
Where he took over the lease on a small hotel, which was really a front for his continued explorations of the area. He started to really methodically work his way through all the cave systems. Certainly had his work cut out. It's the largest limestone district in Europe. And he wasn't a trained archaeologist. In fact, he was a trained etymologist. But he certainly got his hands dirty.
Otto Rahn was really the real Indiana Jones. He was out there. He was into the woods. He was climbing caves. He was climbing castles. He was searching for relics and searching for treasure.
Eventually, he had a breakthrough. Deep in the caves, he found childlike engravings, which he copied in his notebook. In a cavern known as the Bethlehem Grotto, he discovered a strange pentagonal depression carved into the wall. He believed that Cathars once stood in the pentagram when they were being initiated into the order. Rahn also uncovered human skeletons in the caves, which he believed were Cathar remains. To Rahn, this was solid evidence that the Cathars had brought the Grail here. If he could only explore deeper into the caves, Rahn was sure that he would eventually find it. But after years of expensive explorations, Rahn ran out of money.
Otto left France under something of a cloud. He was unable to make the payments on the hotel he'd taken over, and he hadn't been able to pay his staff, and there were in fact legal proceedings against him.
When he returned to Germany, all he had to show for his efforts were notes for a book. But unknown to Rahn, a copy of his book would fall into the hands of the one man in Germany who had both the resources and the will to relaunch his expedition: Heinrich Himmler.
Before the Nazis came to power, people like Otto Rahn were, these kind of weedy, inconsequential figures. They're obsessed with finding the Holy Grail. This was something no one really took seriously. But then suddenly you get this whole new regime that takes these things extremely seriously.
Rahn had never shown any interest in the politics of the Nazis. But now Heinrich Himmler would provide a solution to the biggest problem he faced in his quest for the Grail. Because he offered Rahn the one thing he needed: money.
He was told that the SS would take over funding his research, that they'd give him all the money he needed to continue his search. The only catch being you'd have to wear a black uniform and report to his superiors.
Rahn now found himself in the SS, an organization recruited from the Aryan elite of Nazi Germany. Its members were required to prove their ethnic purity and trace their German bloodline often as far back as the 18th century. It ran some of the most intimidating branches of the Nazi state, including concentration camps and the secret police. Despite this, Rahn seemed to have no concerns about joining.
When you don't have any money and somebody offers you 1,000 Reichsmark a month, and the only thing you have to do that is to join the SS. And you could have a carte blanche, you could go anywhere in Europe and do your hobby. Otto's hobby was to research. So he said, yeah, I'll take the money, I'll go find, treasures and stuff. Why not?
In 1936, on Himmler's orders, Unterscharführer Rahn joined one of the strangest and most unusual outfits in the SS, a unit entirely staffed by academics. It was called the Ahnenwerber.
If you want the classic example of how the Nazis manipulated intellectualism and academic behavior, you can go no further than look at the Ahnenwerber. This was an institution set up ultimately by Himmler to research, quote unquote, German ancestry. And it was to look at how you could construct a mythology of Aryanism and Germanic culture.
Himmler believed the Germans were a master race, set aside from all others by their nobility and purity. The Ahnenwerber's task was to provide intellectual proof for this claim.
The Ahnenwerber is very much Himmler's baby. These are his academics, these are his scientists, these are his historians, these are his archaeologists, and they're there ultimately to do one thing: to prove that Himmler's right. Unfortunately, he's completely wrong.
As an academic, joining the Ahnenwerber was the equivalent of selling your soul, because to be a member, you would be asked to prove things that were not true. For example, Himmler even wanted the Ahnenwerber to prove that Jesus was not Jewish.
They were creating their own Bible, an Aryan Bible, a Bible in which Jesus was an Aryan.
The Ahnenwerber claimed that Jesus was part of a tribal group which was not Semitic, but Aryan.
Difficult to believe that you could take Judaism out of the Bible, but that's what the Nazis were doing, and they literally did it. They created an Aryan Bible.
Although it might seem ridiculous, the work of the Ahnenwerber was not harmless.
One's got to be very, very careful not just to write off the Ahnenwerber as a bunch of harmless cranks. No, these people are willingly subverting their own knowledge, their own academic excellence in order to prove something that will later be used to murder people. But
for the moment, Rahn turned a blind eye. In return, he got lavishly funded in his quest for the Grail. With Himmler's backing, Rahn threw himself into his research with renewed vigor and soon published a second book, Lucifer's Court. It was based on new research and on his earlier explorations of the caves around Montségur, where he was convinced the Cathars had hidden the Grail. Himmler was impressed with Rahn's progress. On Reichsführer's order, 5,000 copies of Rahn's book were bound in the finest leather and distributed to the Nazi elite.
Otto's books, first Crusade Against the Grail and his sequel, Court of Lucifer, rapidly became compulsory reading at a certain level of promotion within the SS. If you rose above a certain rank, you were required to read Rahn, and I bet a lot of people really cursed at the idea of having to plow through that material.
With Himmler's backing, Rahn swiftly rose through the ranks of the SS, even though he was not typical SS material.
He was a scholar, an academic, a writer, a poet, and not a warrior. He was a terrible soldier. He was not a great physical specimen. He smoked too much. He was he wasn't very useful on the exercise ground. He was very poor with a gun. He was still promoted very rapidly and ended up as an Obergruppenführer.
But his new power and riches came at a terrible cost to his integrity. Reading proofs of his new book, Rahn discovered that someone had inserted anti-Semitic passages. Rahn chose to ignore this. Still, his only interest was in finding the Grail.
It was a devil's deal that I think he was perhaps too quick to pick up on.
Himmler would now send Rahn all over Europe to find the Grail.
Rahn is dispatched to any number of locations. There's a lot of letters from the time where Otto is asking permission to visit various sites and excavate various sites, and it's just literally lists of place names.
He visited Europe's most famous pagan sites. He conducted excavations and visited pre-Christian monuments around the continent, including the Exensteiner, a towering rock formation in northwestern Germany where ancient Germanic tribes had worshipped for centuries. Himmler even dispatched Rahn as far as Iceland at the head of an SS expedition searching for the Grail. But despite a worldwide quest lasting over 2 years, Rahn couldn't find it.
The fact that he couldn't find the physical Grail made him very nervous, because he couldn't really please Himmler the way he wanted to please him.
Little by little, Rahn began to lose Himmler's confidence.
There's an increasing desperation in the way that Otto attempted to safeguard his position. He was desperate to try and come up with some kind of material evidence for Himmler, to try and show that he was actually of value to the Nazi party after all.
And when Rahn returned from one of his trips, he began to see the SS for what it really was. A terrifying force that oppressed and brutalized its victims.
Really, it became a kind of a state within a state, almost like a parallel form of the police force of the army.
Otto was away a lot, so he didn't really see it much. And when he did come home in Germany, he noticed the change, he noticed the difference.
Suddenly it had become clear to Rahn the danger he was in for failing to find the Grail.
I think he realized his days were numbered.
So he started to drink, he started to smoke.
A general sense of panic seems to have set in. Things began to fall apart.
Rahn desperately hoped that Heinrich Himmler would give him more time. But Himmler had run out of patience. In 1937, Himmler stripped Rahn of his rank. Rahn was sent to act as a guard at the notorious Dachau and Buchenwald concentration camps. The concentration camps were built by the Nazis to imprison political and social undesirables. At that time, inmates in Buchenwald included socialists, communists, gypsies, Jehovah's Witnesses, and homosexuals, who were herded into inhuman conditions.
He saw people being hurt, beaten up, murdered. He wanted to get out of there quick. He didn't want to have anything to do with it. He wanted to flee. He wanted to go somewhere else, live somewhere else. He asked several times to live here in France, but it was denied. He didn't really want to be part of the Germany that it had become.
He wrote to a friend,
I have much sorrow in my country. Impossible for a tolerant, liberal man like me to live in a nation that my native country has become.
He was scared out of his senses.
there was a particular reason that what Rahn had seen at Buchenwald filled him with terror. Because he was hiding a dangerous secret. He was himself homosexual.
He had covered this up from the SS from the very beginning because obviously homosexuality, just like being Jewish, was something which would get one sent to the camps. Certainly a lot of people died for the same reasons.
And there was something even worse. Rahn wasn't a pure-blooded Aryan. He was Jewish.
He had Jewish roots through his mother, Clara, which succeeded in covering up for quite a long period of time.
As a member of the SS, Rahn was required to prove he was of pure Aryan descent. It was something he had been deliberately avoiding.
There's also the matter of his Ahnenpass, the certificate of racial purity that he was meant to fill out, which he never submitted.
An Ahnenpass needed to show 4 generations of a pure German bloodline. He had hoped that if he could find the Grail, then no one would be concerned about his Ahnenpass. But he had failed to find it. And in 1939, his luck finally ran out.
People found out that his parents, especially his mother, was Jewish. And it was obvious that he was gay. There were so many people saying it, proving it to his superiors.
A gay Jewish SS officer could not survive long in Nazi Germany. Coupled with his failure to find the Grail, Rahn's options were narrowing.
Plainly, Otto's position within the SS became untenable.
In March 1939, Rahn traveled to the German-Austrian border. High in the snow-covered Alps, he headed out into the mountains. Here, winter temperatures sit well below freezing. Rahn took with him only a bottle of whiskey.
It is interesting that it was very close to the 16th of March, to the anniversary of the fall of the Chateau of Montsegur and the burning of the Cathar martyrs. Maybe he chose that date deliberately.
I think he chose the Endura, the death of the Cathars, to sit in the forest, in the middle of the forest on a mountain slope with a magnificent view.
A notice in a Nazi newspaper reported it as a tragic death of an outstanding SS officer and scientist. In 1939, Europe descended into war. Himmler's SS were in the thick of the fighting. But even so, the Reichsfuhrer continued his search for the Grail throughout the war.
Yeah, one might readily have assumed that the death of their Parsifal, their lead Grail hunter, might have closed down the whole program. But this wasn't entirely the end of Himmler's interest in the occult and the archaeological oddities of the past.
In 1940, Himmler accompanied Hitler on a mission to Barcelona to convince Spanish dictator General Franco to bring Spain into the war. But Himmler had an ulterior motive for traveling with the Führer to Spain. He had a new lead for the Grail. It took Himmler to Montserrat Abbey in the Pyrenean Mountains, an hour from Barcelona. An abbey built on the foundations of an ancient castle. The SS had uncovered an age-old Catalonian folk song about a Grail-like mystical font of life at that castle. Himmler now believed that the Grail castle might not be Montségur in France, but instead Montserrat in Spain. Himmler ordered that the sole German-speaking monk at the abbey, Andrew Ripple Noble, should help him with the quest. But if the monk knew anything, he decided against telling Himmler, and the Reichsfuhrer left Spain empty-handed. However, it seems that Himmler's quest did not end there. The next stage of the story would be taken up by an American author, Howard Buchner, in 1991. As a young man in 1945, Buchner was part of the American advance through Europe. Like Rahn, he would become fascinated with the legend of the Grail.
Colonel Howard Buchner had been a surgeon with the American Army 3rd Battalion and was allegedly the first Allied doctor to enter Dachau.
There, he supposedly uncovered information from a captured SS officer, which he included in his book about the Nazi quest for the Grail.
Buchner wrote a book called Emerald Cup, a very curious book.
According to Buchner's sources, now that Himmler had ruled out Spain, he once again focused his attentions on the French Pyrenees. But this time, he decided on a radically different approach. Frustrated with the efforts of academics such as Rahn, Himmler now called upon one of the Reich's greatest military heroes to take up the quest. Otto Skorzeny.
He's a bear of a man. He's very tall, he's very charming, he's very imposing, he's got a dueling scar down one of his cheeks, and in many ways he's a pretty unreconstructed Nazi.
Skorzeny was the chief of Germany's special troops, the most famous and feared commando in the German army. Bold, fearless, and a hero to the Nazi faithful.
Buchner claims that Himmler had dispatched none other than Otto Skorzeny, the famous paratrooper and commando, allegedly the most dangerous man in the world, to retrieve the sacred treasure.
Himmler's tried the academics, he's tried the boffins. Why don't we send Otto Skorzeny?
Skorzeny was more than qualified for the task. In September 1943, he had led a daring raid on a prison in the Italian Alps to free the captured Italian dictator, Benito Mussolini. Dropping in by glider with a squadron of elite German commandos, they came under heavy fire. But Scorzeni would ensure the mission's success and his own glory by returning with Mussolini alive.
He's, in many ways, represents kind of the ultimate one-man Nazi fighting machine. Now, who better to send on your Grail quest, supposedly, than Otto Scorzeni?
So, according to Buchner, in March 1944, Himmler charged Scorzeni with yet another top-secret mission. But this time, to the castle of Montségur in France to find the Grail. Scorzeni decided to look again at Rahn's theory that the Grail had been taken out of the castle 700 years before by escaping Cathars.
Colonel Howard Buchner believed that Otto Scorzeni was able to look at the chateau with a military mind and imagine how such a feat might be possible.
Until now, nobody could understand how the Cathars could have escaped. 3 sides of the castle were besieged by thousands of soldiers, and the remaining side backed onto an impassable precipice. But by studying this cliff, Scorzeni had a revelation.
One side of the castle is this sheer cliff, and obviously everyone thinks, well, the Grail can't be hidden there because that's impossible. There's no way they could have done that. But Scorzeni, because he's this supposed tactical military genius, is the first person to say, but what if it is hidden there?
Scorzeni worked out that by using ropes, the escaping Cathars could have lowered themselves unseen over the castle walls and down the cliff face. If he was right, everyone else had been looking on the wrong side of the mountain.
Scorzeni quickly assumed that the Cathars would have taken the least likely route out of the castle and escaped down the sheer side of the cliff. And according to Buchner, he swiftly picked up their trail from the base of the cliff.
Six days after Scorzeni was said to have arrived at Montségur, it was the anniversary of the Cathar massacre.
March the 16th, 1944 was the 700th anniversary of the fall of the chateau.
A small group of local people chose to mark the occasion with a simple ceremony at the base of the castle. Then, something unexpected happened.
The story has it that while they were getting together on the mountain, that a German aircraft flew overhead.
It's the 700th anniversary of the massacre of the Cathars, and the plane makes a cross, a Cathar cross, in the sky.
Howard Buchner claims that this was a sign from Himmler that Scorzeni had been successful in his mission in recovering the Emerald Cup.
But could this be true? Had Scorzeni really succeeded where everyone else had failed and found the Grail? Buchner's story is certainly entertaining, but there is one fundamental problem with his account. And that concerns Otto Scorzeni.
Whenever you hear the name Otto Scorzeni mentioned in connection with any fantastical story, to me that's a really important signifier that the story is almost certainly going to be an absolute pile of rubbish.
Although Scorzeni was a real person, captured by the Allies at the end of the war, he could not have led this mission.
by linking Scorzeni's alleged retrieval of the Holy Grail to the 700th anniversary of the fall of the castle. It means that he would have to have been here on the 16th of March, 1944.
But the Allies have proof that Otto Skorzeny was not in France in March 1944. He was in Yugoslavia, where the Germans were involved in vicious fighting.
Now, the truth is, when he was supposed to have been supposedly finding the Holy Grail in France, he was in fact, somewhere near the Eastern Front.
Buchner's story gets even wilder, with the Grail being taken by Nazi U-boat to Antarctica, where it is placed in a cave of ice in a secret Nazi base in the Mühlig-Hoffmann Mountains.
I mean, all of it makes for a wonderful story, and certainly after the Indiana Jones movies, we love the idea of uniformed Nazi stormtroopers ransacking the castles of the Pyrenees.
I mean, this is fun, but it's just not true.
But even though Buchner's story is just fantasy, the story of the Nazi hunt for the Grail is not. Heinrich Himmler was obsessed with mysticism, and he did fund expensive expeditions for the Grail, including Reims. But he never found it, because in all probability, it never even existed. Heinrich Himmler was eventually captured by the Allies at the end of the war and committed suicide whilst in British custody.
This is the house in Lüneburg where Himmler committed suicide. In that room, the most despicable of all German criminals contrived to take poison after arrest.
But the horrifying truth is that millions of people across Europe would lose their lives on the direct orders of this man. Orders which the Nazis attempted to justify through the work of the Ahnenerbe and men like the Grail hunter Otto Rahn.